Well, we can now speak to Dan Perry, who's a former regional editor for the Associated Press. He also served as the chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Israel, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thanks for your time. So a recent poll that I was looking at, conducted in Israel, shows that Israelis massively favor Donald Trump over Kamala Harris. And here are the statistics. I mean, about 66% chose the former president, while only 17% chose Kamala Harris. How do you explain that?
Well, there's a perception in Israel that Trump is simply instinctively in favor of anything the country does. Now, there is some opposition to Trump as well on the part of the liberal half of the country, probably more than half, that has a sense that Trump in power is good for perhaps Netanyahu, but not necessarily good for Israel because they themselves oppose Netanyahu's policies. But look, given the various steps that Trump took during his first term, he certainly has significant support here. And the right half of Israel, maybe more than half, maybe less than half, depending on issue, I think assumes correctly that Trump doesn't care that much about the humanitarian issues that have bedeviled the current government in its conflict in Gaza, especially.
Right.
So I understand why, but I think they may be in for a surprise because Trump is also very, very capricious. Trump has no patience with messy things, and I think the chance that Trump calls Netanyahu and says end the war no matter what is actually higher than the chances that
What are you basing that on? What are you basing that on?
Well, statements where he actually said that I want the war to end, do it fast. I think he will care less about the means with which this is achieved, but the idea of putting up with the forever war when Trump himself is on record as hating the notion of forever wars, I think stands on shaky ground. I mean, you talk a lot about how the Biden administration fled Afghanistan in truce. They were awkwardly implementing an agreement that Trump came to that was essentially surrendered to the Taliban because he hates forever wars. So I think Trump's impatience, I think his capriciousness, I think in general his inclination to show that he's wielding his power might work, in fact, against Israel. But of course, it also might not. It's definitely true that Trump is not going to care about what happens on the ground and who's killing who.
What about a Harris presidency? I mean, Harris has so far aligned herself fully with Biden's policies with respect to Israel, as well as obviously what's happening on the ground in Gaza and the wider Middle East, in fact. Do you think that could change if she were to win the presidency? And what would it mean for Israel?
I don't think it likely will. I hear the reports on your channel, Doreen, with respect. I think they're missing the point. It's not about forcing a ceasefire on people who refuse to have a ceasefire. It's about the goals, and the U.S. agrees with Israel's goals of removing Hamas, a vile terrorist group, that has committed the barbaric massacre and continues to oppress its own people, to remove them from Gaza. And they also agree with the idea that Israel cannot possibly put up anymore with Hezbollah parked on its border, firing rockets at it at the behest of Iran. And I actually believe, as frankly I do, that to remove Hezbollah is a favor to the Lebanese people first and foremost. So they agree with Israel's goals. Now, Harris.
Well, I mean,
Trump,
okay. That is something that we have to ask the Lebanese people about, obviously. But just make your point on Harris and what it would mean for Israel.
Look, I know plenty of Lebanese, and I have no doubt. But okay, as for Harris, she agrees with Israel's goals also, but may be uncomfortable with the destruction that's caused along the way. Look, Biden basically had certain designs for the Middle East. There are certain things he wants from Netanyahu. He wanted Netanyahu to agree to a return of the PA to Gaza, for example, which would create a narrative that holds water. If they, for example, then go to the Arab countries and say, look, pressure Hamas, but really pressure Hamas to give up because there's this plausible narrative. Biden wanted this, and no one played along. I think the chances that Trump forces the hand of everyone, of the Arabs to pressure Hamas, but for real, of Israel to agree to a plausible narrative is actually higher than the chances that Harris does this, because to the extent that Harris is continuity from Biden had a series of really good ideas that included, in the end, normalization between Saudi and Israel and a path forward to some version of Palestinian independence. No one agreed, and he sort of took it. I think Harris will possibly also continue to take it.
Okay.
Trump, with his unpredictability, as I say, might not.
All right, we'll leave it there. Dan Perry, thanks for speaking to us.
Dan Perry is a former regional editor for the Associated Press. He also served as the chairman of the Foreign Press Association in Israel. Joins us now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us. So first of all, how much attention do you think most Israelis are paying to this election? Do they see it as crucial to Israel's interests?
Well, they're paying a tremendous amount of attention, as I think are people all over the world, also because it's such a stupendous drama in almost every way, and in some ways unprecedented. I think there is a sense that what happens will impact Israel, and there is a lot of anxiousness in Israel for something to happen that's different from the reality of the past year or so. So yes, they're certainly on tenterhooks waiting to see what happens.
Do you think the dynamics of personalities, if I could put it that way, whether we're talking about the Harris-Netanyahu versus Trump-Netanyahu dynamics, will it make a huge difference in U.S.-Israeli relations?
I think it might. I mean, the current administration is at loggerheads with Netanyahu on everything about the long-range strategy for the Middle East. Make no mistake, they support Israel's desire to dislodge Hamas and Hezbollah. That's clear, and I think more people than is evident actually support that too, including most of the West, and I think most Arab leaders. But the way in which Israel has gone about it, and the fact that Israel continues to resist the U.S. preference, for example, that it state that it's willing to have the PA, Palestinian Authority, return to power in Gaza, to create a plausible narrative that might enable some version of progress, not to mention the degree of destruction that we've seen, especially in Gaza. All this matters with the Democrats. I think it may matter even more with Kamala Harris than with Joe Biden, and it doesn't matter with Trump. So I think some Israelis who are happy with the status quo may prefer Trump, and indeed most Israelis tell pollsters that they do because he's seen as so pro-Israel, but they may be surprised about what's coming because Trump is so impatient and so given to simplistic narratives that I can see him, turning on a dime and doing things that may be surprising. But Trump, I think for sure, is more likely to act to change the narrative here, and that could work in favor of Bibi, which may not be good for Israel, and it could work against. It could mean big things regarding Iran. I can see Trump absolutely going to Iran and laying down the law and saying no more proxies around the region, taking over countries, and no more nukes. I can't see Kamala Harris doing that. So the Democrats, I think, are more likely to be acquiescent to a story here that for many people in the region is not a good story, and that includes most thoughtful Israelis. Trump, though he's very far from thoughtful, might actually be a sort of deus ex machina. But we just don't know. Like with Ukraine, we know he's going to sell out Ukraine. That's just clear, and that will be the #1 impact in foreign policy. With the Middle East, Trump is basically a cipher.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan Perry, for sharing your views.
My pleasure.
Do you agree with the analysis, for example, we just heard from Dan Perry there, that a Trump administration versus a Kamala Harris administration might make a difference in terms of who lays down the law, to use his words, the degree, perhaps, of the U.S. Interest or commitment to try and enforce its will on countries like Iran?
Look, for the past 50 or 60 years, there has been no global power with influence in the Middle East like the United States. Not even during the Cold War did the Soviet Union have the same influence like the United States. And since the end of the Cold War, meaning for the past 30, 35 years, the United States has been the sole power, really, more or less, with the exception of a bit of a Russian presence in Syria and so on. America has been calling the shots, and we've been living sort of 3 decades of Pax Americana.